Hello and welcome to this edition of Assembly Calendar. I'm Visscher. Our guest today is New York State Assemblyman Pete Lopez. Pete represents the 102nd Assembly District, which encompasses the Mid-Hudson Valley, Northern Catskills, Southern Tier, and portions of the Capital Region. Thank you very much for joining us today. As of this taping, we are in the first week of March, and the attention is turning, of course, to the April 1 deadline, which is when the state legislature needs to come to an agreement, so to speak, and passage of an on-time state budget. The question is whether or not the budget will be passed on time again. It has been consecutively for the past few years, and we're going to get an update from the Assemblyman. Always a pleasure to see you, Mr. Lopez.
My pleasure. Thank you. Thanks so much.
How are things going with the budget process?
Well, we're moving forward. We have revenue estimates that have come out. We're trying to drive towards consensus. The budget hearings have largely wrapped up at this point. And so following the revenue agreement will be the issuance of one House budgets from both the Assembly and the Senate, and then an attempt to reconcile. But there's so many issues flying around, and we may get to some of these in more detail, but between education, minimum wage, or some other social issues that are being pushed into the budget, question will be, can we come to an agreement by the first? And particularly on minimum wage, I'm not sure that we can unless there's some movement between the opposing sides, because there's a deep divide on that issue.
The governor has been really pushing this minimum wage issue. He wants to raise it to $15 an hour across the board. Initially, it was for fast food employees. Now it's $15 across the board. I know they have vans driving around the state. So it's interesting.
Yeah.
This seems to be one of his priorities.
It does, and part of the challenge, and I've been focusing on this issue, is the governor has been pursuing this, as he has with many initiatives, outside of the legislative arena. So he started with agency rulemaking. He used existing statute and rulemaking power within the Department of Labor to address the fast food industry. Then, it's my belief, he used executive order for government workers, state workers, and now is coming back to the legislature. My frustration is, I think everybody understands the need to strengthen the workforce and to give people more opportunity, but there seems to be a disconnect between a minimum wage and a living wage. And I think all of us, or many of us, have been minimum wage. Many of us have worked with minimum wage, and part of the prospect of minimum wage is giving people a chance to train. You teach them how to do a job. You teach them how to work in some cases, how to perform in a certain environment. The employer spends time and energy to bring that person up to speed, and they lose productivity, understandably, because they're investing their time and energy in this new person. And so what I'm hearing, that there's a lot of frustration, particularly in the not-for-profits and in others, because the cost of raising the wage will be borne by the employers, but many employers are saying, well, where does that come from? So our ARCs and not-for-profits in particular are saying we provide very sensitive, intimate care to our clients. We don't have the money. Governor, where's the money coming from? Farms and small businesses are saying we're price takers. We don't give prices. We're not sure we can withstand this. So there's going to have to be some sort of conversation between those who are being asked to cover this cost and those who would benefit. One observation from ARC is we're raising the floor will become their ceiling. They won't be able to pay employees more than that. So there's some big issues, and that issue in and of itself could be enough to stop the budget process.
One of the things that we've seen play out under the Cuomo administration is that he tends to in particular with issues that he's really heartfelt about, he tends to roll them into the budget process. In other words, a quid quo, it's like a quo pro kind of thing, where he says
something like that,
quid pro quo kind of thing. He says, "I will," right? But he says, "I will give you this and you will get, if you give me this." I will give you that kind of thing. Yeah. And so the concern is that what if he decides to roll this into the budget and not make it a separate policy issue?
Yeah, so ultimately, the budget itself is a policy document. It's policy with dollar signs attached, and that's what makes the budget so intriguing and such a real earnest undertaking. It's not just an accounting function. It's setting priorities and putting dollar signs. This particular project has nothing to do with state funds necessarily. It has everything to do with public policy, but you're right, by pushing it into the budget, what it does is it gives the governor leverage to put the legislature in a corner. And that's really not the best way. It may be an effective way for him, but that's not how policymaking should occur. We shouldn't be taking a non-budget item, throwing it into the budget process, and then possibly holding the budget hostage to address that issue.
The city of Albany, well, Albany in general, has been under this cloud of dysfunction over the past several years. We saw this recently play out with the resignation, conviction, and resignations of Assembly Speaker Sheldon Silver and Senate Majority Leader Dean Skelos. And where I'm going with this is ethics reform.
Correct.
Where do things stand at this point? I know the conference the Assembly Republican Conference has been at the forefront of ethics reform proposals. What are the chances we see something done, such as pension forfeiture, done this year?
I would have to say that a number of my colleagues from upstate, downstate, regardless of political stripe, have been very frustrated by the lack of attention. And there was a lot of energy at the beginning of session, and a lot of promise for reform. That seemed to have waned, but now we see the governor again signaling that he's interested in reform. You know, ultimately, the goal is to have a bright line test and to make it clear what's the line between propriety and impropriety that an elected official must work within, and what are the penalties that occur if in fact you cross that line. So with Sheldon Silver and Dean Skelos, and again there are many others, the issue is, should they keep their pension? My understanding is it's a constitutional protection. So I have to go research this more fully, but to do that means two successive legislatures have to change, propose a change, and then it goes to the public. But there are more reforms that could occur. Matter of fact, we've hosted a number of bills that are aimed at reducing the power of leadership. And really, when you think about it, in their case in particular, it's the concentration of power. So if all this power is concentrated in the Speaker and the President of the Senate, the rank and file, the everyday members, find themselves on the defensive when they try to move their issues or priorities forward, because they may be blocked, they may be pressured. And so we have a number of initiatives that are aimed at reducing the power of those key actors, but also broadening the understanding of what is acceptable and what's not.
The budget process involves hearings.
Yes.
Basically, the members of the legislature listen to vested parties' interests.
Sure.
And they give their numbers, if you will, and you hammer out a deal in terms of actual revenue numbers. One of the hearings you attended had to do with broadband.
Right.
Not only the affordability of broadband, but the accessibility of broadband.
Correct.
Talk to us about
Correct.
that.
So when you think about it, broadband has the interest in broadband and the usage of broadband is in every home, effectively. That's what we want. And I make a parallel between broadband and electricity. So in the early 1900s, when electricity was becoming introduced to society, rural areas and outlying areas in particular were slow to get it because it wasn't economically viable to bring the technology to the people. So at the federal level, they instituted the Rural Electrification Act, which allowed government to incentivize business to bring the technology to farms, to rural areas. Really what we're seeing now is the same thing with broadband. It's cost prohibitive to lay fiber when you are dealing with sparse rural areas.
Companies like Verizon and Time Warner Cable.
Sure, it's cost prohibitive. And so what's happened is that areas that have population densities have the service. Areas that are more remote don't. And it puts those areas at an economic disadvantage competitively in terms of being able to access the internet for business purposes, for tourism, also for everyday life. So our goal here was to test the PSC and see where we're going with bringing it to every household.
You had several concerns that you addressed with the PSC commissioner, and
Correct.
we're going to go ahead and take a listen to that, and we'll come back and discuss in further detail with Assemblyman Pete Lopez.
With the stimulus funds, there was an effort to do a major broadband initiative across the nation, as you know. We had a number of providers who applied, and then in some cases, some who turned the money away because there were too many strings attached, or they couldn't meet the upfront costs for investment on their own. And so I'm just curious, is PSC looking at the mix of policies to make sure that in cases of market failure, where we can't deliver broadband X number of $1,000 per mile, are our policies going to be sufficient to reach that end goal that we talked about of having every user in the state secure, particularly in these outlying rural areas? Are you looking at the economic dynamic?
Absolutely. The department is balancing the interests of what the consumers are looking for, consumer protections, competition, while ensuring the continued innovation within the industry. And those all will be taken into consideration as we evaluate our policies going forward, making sure consumers are getting the services that they want and need at an affordable price, while incenting the marketplace to continue to innovate and compete.
So answers, was that the answer you were looking for?
It is, because there's a goal to have broadband in every home by a certain year end date. What I'm going to have to continue to do is monitor how is that playing out. For example, in my one of my counties in my district, Greene County, Lexington area, I believe that they applied and were not successful just recently. So if they continue to apply and are turned down, when do they give up? When does the state come back and say, okay, it's your turn now? So my frustration is, absent a more proactive effort to get this technology into rural areas, we're going to have to fight and claw and scratch to get it there, and we're going to have to really dig in on this.
One of the pleasurable things about serving as a state elected official in Albany is bringing in groups of people who, and honoring them for their heroic deeds and the such, or what have you, organizations and such, and the impact that they're having on the community. One of those organizations that you have a long time history with is ARC.
Yeah, I have to say that the ARC community is really unique, and I've had a chance to work with them for many years. And when you think about their role, they take the most vulnerable people, people who are most at risk, who have nowhere to go, and they help them with the quality of life. They try to help them with skill development. It's a group that we champion. And
you honored them recently on the floor of the State Assembly. Let's go ahead and roll that.
Our colleague, Assemblyman Pete Lopez, has some very special guests here in the back of the chamber. Representing the 1,200 employees from the ARC of Ulster Green and the 1,300 people affected by intellectual and developmental disabilities who are supported by the agency. ARC of Ulster Green is celebrating their 60th anniversary this year, so it's a very special year for the organization and for the people affected by it. Present today is the Executive Director, John McHugh, as well as staff members Bozina Kowalska, Shelley Morris, Beverly Deese, Sarah Wade, Alice Caulfield, Lynn Slofkin, and Melissa Paradis, as well as the advocate, Michaela Hoskins. So if you could please extend the cordiality of the House on behalf of Assemblyman Lopez to these very special guests.
Certainly, on behalf of Assemblyman Lopez, the Speaker, and all of members, we welcome you here to the New York State Assembly. We extend to you the privileges of the floor. We wish you a happy 50th to the organization. We also thank you for the work that you're doing, taking care of friends and families in your area, and making sure that Mr. Lopez smiles a great deal today because he has visitors. Thank you. All right, also. And joined by Assemblyman Cahill. Is that you hiding over there? Right. The Sergeant at Arms and you look so much alike, I almost got mistaken. So again, and also by Mr. Cahill. Thank you so very much. Please always feel welcome and come back and visit us.
So honoring the great work of that organization.
Yes,
sir.
Absolutely.
Always a pleasure to see you.
Pleasure to see you.
Thank you very much for joining us today. Always a pleasure to see you folks at home. This has been an edition of Assembly Calendar. Until next time, take care.